President Trump met with some of the biggest names in the tech world last week, all, of course, part of his technology council. And joining us now to talk about the responsibility Silicon Valley and the U.S. government have in leading innovation is Chairman of DocuSign, Krach. Keith, thanks so much for joining us today. I mean,
thank you so much, Corey and Tim, for having me back on the show.
In the break, I was just telling you how much I love DocuSign, but we're gonna get to my deep love of DocuSign. But let's start with this technology council. I mean, will this initiative work?
Right. Well, you know, this is a big issue in terms of bridging the gap between Silicon Valley and Washington. And you know, if you think about what DocuSign does, we're literally a war on paper, and paper's bipartisan. So the great opportunity for the U.S., particularly in the public sector, particularly in the federal sector, is to make it more efficient, make it more productive, get rid of all that paper. And I think there's tremendous opportunities there, and we can learn a lot from a lot of the other governments. When we talked last week about the national imperative in Japan in terms of accelerating their digital transformation. The same thing is going on in the EU, where they actually changed the regulations about a year ago to standardize accepting electronic signature across all EU member states.
Keith, I want to get back to the Tech Council that met last week. A lot of the CEOs have come out against policies of the Trump administration. No question that a lot of these executives don't see eye to eye. We saw Elon Musk step off of the President's Council after the President made the decision to step out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Do you think the disagreements between Silicon Valley and the Trump administration are going to actually hinder any sort of progress that's made between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C.?
You know, I don't think so at all in the long term. I think everybody's building up relationships. I think everybody's trying to articulate the issues in front of. I mean, with the know-how in Silicon Valley and the innovation that goes on there, I just can't see anything other than good coming out of it. And what I respect is bringing together all the technology leaders to, you know, fight the common enemy, and that is productivity of the U.S., retraining the workforce, all those kind of things. This is going to make us a nation that can compete more and actually foster commerce around the world.
Well, Keith, when we think more global in terms of advancing digital initiatives and efforts, I mean, who are some of the major world leaders that are really trying to transform their own country's digital footprint? Yeah,
I think Chancellor Merkel over there in Germany, I mean, she's education-wise, she's a physicist, she gets it. And, you know, one of the and I was just over at the CeBIT conference where they had her and Prime Minister Abe-san, and they both declared there that their one of their national imperatives is this digital transformation. She clearly gets it. France clearly gets it. Japan is kind of stepping on the gas, and in Japan, they have the second largest amount of paper per capita in the world, and you know, the third largest GMP. And they know that, particularly these days, security is very key, so it's all about trust when you look at dealing with people's most important documents and accelerating commerce around the world.
You mentioned a lot of other countries. We just had two guests on from Israel who talked about innovation in the country and named some big acquisitions that have happened in Israel over the last few years, of course, Mobileye and Waze. Do you ever get concerned that the U.S. is no longer a leader in innovation, despite the fact that we have some of the biggest tech companies in the world based here?
Well, I think there'll always be great innovators around the world, and you know, particularly in Israel. I mean, this is some of the greatest technologists, some of the greatest computer scientists in the world. We have 60 people over in Israel, and you know, I think the thing that makes companies strong, the thing that makes the world strong, is that diversity of thought and those different temperaments, talents, and convictions being combined. So.
Wait, let's stick with that diversity of thought, because that's going to bring me to some government policies that can somehow, at times, be limiting here to the U.S. in terms of entrepreneurs being able to get the so-called startup visa to come over to our country. I mean, there's no infrastructure really in place to allow entrepreneurs from other countries to come over and really get the funding that they need to be, or loans to be able to start a business. What do we need to do on the regulation and policy side to make sure we're attracting entrepreneurs to the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that's a big issue. As you guys know, I was chairman of the board of trustees at Purdue for 6 years. We graduate more engineers than any other university in the U.S., and we have the second largest international population in terms of students. That's a big issue because we graduate all these great engineering students. We need them in the U.S., and many times they can't stay. And I would say the vast majority of them want to stay here.
Right.
So this is a big issue. I think this is a big issue for the tech community. It's also a big issue for Washington. So I just hope everybody is open in terms of the different things we can do. The other thing that is also a huge issue is retraining the workforce. And, you know, McDonald's is now putting robots in their stores and everything like that. And by the way, I'm all for automation. I ran a robot company back in the early 80s when I was at General Motors. And I think that retraining is a big issue. So one of the things we did at Purdue just a few months ago, we bought Kaplan, which is the third largest online university in the world, to help spread that brand, to help extend the reach. So I think those are two big issues.
Keith, I want to get back to your travels around the world. You spend a lot of time on the road. What have you found in other countries that you've been able to learn? Like, what can we learn from different countries' economies that you're able to take back here to DocuSign, and what can other entrepreneurs learn from that?
Yeah, you know, interesting. For example, in Japan, their culture is very much one of taking an innovation and taking it a step further. And one of the great examples of that is, you know, classically, as we talked last week, in Japan, they use the hanko, which is the physical chop. That's actually their designation for the signature. And we partnered with a 92-year-old company called Shashihata. They're the issuer of the hanko in Japan. We came up with the e-hanko. And when we were over there, the president just said, of Shashihata said, the DocuSign and Shashihata's e-hanko is replacing the physical hanko. It is fast becoming the trusted standard in terms of security, efficiency, and and speed.
Right. I want to go back to education. I like that you mentioned you were at, was it Purdue?
Purdue.
Purdue, you guys graduate the most engineers. Is that what we need more of in terms of not just, I know we were talking about innovation and regulation and policy.
Yeah.
What about the education part of it? What about the STEM programs? What about getting kids
Yes.
involved in that much, much sooner instead of, you know, I want to say, was it Nike? It wasn't Nike. Somebody else ran a commercial the other day, but I remember LeBron, they were going through different ads saying, we don't need another LeBron. We have 600 basketball players. We don't need another, whoever the soccer player was. We have 1,000 soccer players. What we need are more people in STEM. Is that what we need?
By the way, I personally believe so. I have a big passion for that. Purdue has a big passion for that. And you know what? We moved the dial. I mean, 10 years ago, we brought in a Hispanic woman, France Cordova, who just finished her term as director of National Science Foundation, to really begin to move that needle. And we did, but the one thing that was crystal clear, you have to start early. And I have a 31-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old daughter. I mean, you have to give them that passion right out of the gate, and it has to begin, you know, even, definitely before high school.
Definitely.
So that's a big area of focus.
Right. One thing I'm curious about, you have a 31-year-old and a 5-year-old. How are their educations different now? Someone who's, you know, 5 years old now, you know, they're going to grow up needing to know how to not only how to use computers, of course, but I mean, are you teaching your child to code? Is that something you're going to be doing? What are you doing educationally for your 5-year-old that you weren't doing when your 31-year-old was 5?
Well, I haven't taught our 5-year-old twins how to code. I have 5 children, by the way.
You have not taught the 5-year-olds yet how to code. We'll wait until their 6th birthday before we start those lessons.
Right. But I can tell you what the twins are doing. They are in a Chinese American school. It's half Chinese, half English, because I figure what better gift to give our children than to learn another language. And if they learn another language, they'll appreciate another culture. And I think if you appreciate a second culture, you're going to appreciate them all. So I think that's one of the best things. So this is when their mind is an absolute sponge. And it is so fun to see these little kids sing head, shoulders, knees and toes in Chinese. I mean, it's really fun.
That is impressive. Wait until they get to be teenagers.
I've seen that product life cycle. It's great.
All right. There we have it. Keith Krach, chairman of DocuSign. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Corey.